Next, from Springfield, we talked to Representative Robert Pritchard about state spending reform on education, how his district is recovering from recent tornadoes, and the controversy over the state-issued standardized test, PARCC. This runs about 12 minutes.
Representative Bob Pritchard, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. For the viewers, you are the lead Republican on appropriations for education, and that is the biggest line item in the state budget. The budget's obviously one of the biggest areas of conversation here at the Capitol.
The biggest, but it isn't the biggest line item in the budget, and that's one of the things we keep working for, funding for early childhood, funding for our community colleges, higher education. So you look at all the way from early childhood all the way through college. Education is what trains people to be good employees, helps bring jobs, employers to our state. And we've got a goal of trying to get to 60% of our people with something beyond high school by the year 2025. And we're kind of struggling with that right now. Certainly the budget cuts don't help that, but there's a number of other factors that are kind of distracting from our achieving of that goal.
The state of Illinois is supposed to have a foundation level of spending per pupil, which I believe is $6,019 per pupil. $61.19. And we are spending only about 89% of that level as of the last year. Do you have any inkling of where we might go? This is obviously going to be an extremely tough budget year coming up.
Well, it is, and we probably aren't going to know where we're ending up until the last moment. But certainly what we're arguing for is this is a good investment in the future of our citizens, and we've got to try to find ways. The governor in his proposed budget put almost $280 million extra into education. He held the community colleges flat funded from the prior year, while he cut, unfortunately, higher education. So that's a debatable issue. We certainly want to look for ways that we can keep funding and keep enhancing the skills of our individuals. And that's what we'll take up the next month or so, is trying to come to some terms with what our priorities are in the state.
What are you hearing? Normally we're supposed to wrap the budget up at the end of May. Do you have any feel, or do you hear anything from your colleagues?
Well, I hear that there's a pool on whether we're going to get done by the end of May or not. And the odds don't favor that, but I never put it past our leadership to come up with an agreement. And one scenario that you could look at is if they don't want to deal with some of the reforms the governor is proposing, they'll just create a budget that doesn't make the reforms, that kind of funds things the way we are, probably overspend what revenue we have, let the governor veto that, and then come back sometime in the summer when they'll blame the governor for the problems that we have in our state. We really need to be sitting down in a bipartisan fashion like we did with the emergency FY15 budget supplement, and do a bipartisan effort of coming up with a solution, looking for some reforms, some cutbacks, and then some additional revenue that don't disadvantage our citizens.
Again, you're the Republican House Caucus, and most Republicans are against any tax increase, but is there any discussion about increasing revenues in one form or another, whether through tax increase or possibly the gaming bill? How much conversation is going on as far as getting more revenue coming in?
I wouldn't say there's a lot of conversation on our side of the aisle, because the governor has made very clear, and we support him in that statement, that we've got to look for ways to look at reform, to cut back the fraud and the abuse, to look at efficiency of operating our agencies and our programs, look at some of the initiatives the governor's talking about in terms of worker compensation reform, looking at some of the tort liability, looking at some enhancement of local government's ability to provide services more efficiently and effective. And if we don't start with those conversations, we aren't going to have the conversation talking about revenue. Because once we supply the revenue, you don't get the reforms.
Let's talk a little bit. Earlier this month we had some tornadoes go through your area in northern Illinois. How is your area recovering from that, and what, if anything, is the state doing?
Well, the state has been very helpful. The Illinois Emergency Management Agency, the state police, the Illinois Department of Transportation were very responsive to the local needs. Our emergency disaster plans that each county is required to have worked very effectively. Other communities brought in support. People have been so generous in helping the victims of this because some people lost everything. Their house was completely gone. Others, it was flattened, and others, it was just partially damaged. The lesson that we're learning from this is that recovery really takes more than just immediate relief. There has to be not only response and relief, but we have to look at rebuilding and looking at long-term recovery. And one of the lessons is that our emergency management plans ought to have a long-term recovery committee that helps look for multiple years at people pulling their lives together, rebuilding if that's possible, but also funding some of the things that insurance doesn't cover. So we're looking for kind of a holistic approach, and we've certainly learned some important lessons in this. One of the most important lessons is that when we get weather reports talking about severe alerts or that severe weather is coming or that tornadoes may be coming, people need to take action. They need to think about where are they going to take cover. How are they going to communicate with their loved ones or their neighbors so they know they're safe? Where are they going to live, perhaps, if you have the kind of disaster that we had in this tornado? People need to be a little bit more attentive. I think we become too complacent. And one of the lessons is everyone is going to have some severe flooding or tornadoes, strong winds, so we better start planning for it. And that's one of the lessons. And we continue to ask people to keep our residents that have been affected in their prayers. If they would like to contribute, we have community foundations for DeKalb County as well as in the town of Rochelle that people can Google and perhaps send donations to those foundations. They're helping these citizens rebuild their lives and try to live more normal expectations.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, that's a good suggestion. What about state funds? Are there state funds for such emergencies to help communities impacted?
Well, there have been federal as well as state funds in the past when you look at some of the disasters we have. Fortunately or unfortunately, this disaster didn't affect that many people, and we're finding over time that Illinois doesn't rank very high for federal funds. So we don't expect any federal funds, and given the financial situation of our state, we really don't expect much from the state. So that's where the private donations have been such a blessing, and we ask people to keep the residents in their hearts and prayers, and if they can, to send some donations.
The park tests, controversial. What is it, and what's the point of controversy?
Well, this is a new state standardized test that our State Board of Education adopted 4 years ago, and we've been in the process of implementing it. It's based on the new learning standards we have in the state, and the federal government is requiring states to have a standardized test that measures their learning standards, how students are progressing. And this was the first year of that test. We're finding out there were lots of bugs in the test, and many of us are advocating for real reforms in the student assessment. It's way too long.
The test is too long?
The test is way too long, 11 hours, when you look at the two different settings that students have to take. And this is all the way from third grade through 1 year in high school. Parents are complaining they would like to opt out their students, and we've had several bills in the legislature this session trying to give them that right. But unfortunately, the federal government says you're going to lose $1.1 billion if you don't have a standardized test that measures your learning standards. So we feel compelled to give and stay with that test. We're trying to improve it. And I think that's what the governor is also advocating, that he doesn't want to lose any federal money, and that we need to improve this test, and that's what we'll be focused on in the months ahead. We have a new State Board of Education committee. It's been reconstituted. We have a new school superintendent. We have a new Secretary of Education. So I think they're well focused on this issue, and we'll see some changes before next spring rolls around.
Yeah, that's an extremely long test. Who says what the test should include? Is that a state or is it federal dictating what things have to be tested?
Well, the state has made a contract with a private organization. There were really only two organizations that had a standardized test that measured our learning standards, and the Park test was the one the state board selected. They did it without any input from the legislature, and we had a bone to pick with them on that. But we are where we are, and we now need to make this test a better test. It tests writing as well as English language art and mathematics, and we just need a test that gives parents assurance that their kids are learning to the grade level that they're in. We satisfy the federal requirement and give satisfaction that our education dollars are being spent wisely.
Okay, maybe we can follow up with you more on that and some of the other issues here. And we appreciate you joining us.
Visit with you.
Thanks.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.